in a mood for some more Melio and some more Dali photos because I'm going to have a bunch of those. Okay, so let's start with a quick survey. Who here does DevOps? Who here does SRE? Production engineering? Who is super annoyed by this question because nobody ain't got time for this and they're just doing whatever they need to do? Okay, perfect. So, for the purpose of this talk, I will mainly use the word DevOps, unless I mean otherwise. So just bear with me. I know that DevOps is a methodology and not actually a role, but I'm not going to mention it every time because I only have 20 minutes. So, let's get started. Okay, so my name is Niv Yungelson, and I am leading the DevOps team at Melio. Melio is a fintech startup that its goal is to keep small business and business, and it is doing so by helping them manage their cash flow. I'm doing DevOps since 2012, more or less, when it was still formulating into what DevOps actually means today. I'm leading the AWS Israel community, and I'm an AWS Community Hero. And I have the nerdiest tattoo. I have a pseudo tattoo on my finger. Okay. So, a simple infrastructure is less prone to downtime. Who agrees with this sentence? Raise your hand up. Okay. So, most of you agree, but let's see how many of you agree in a couple of more minutes. So, let's start with a story time. A short story. On a different timeline, not in our timeline, it's not a real company. There is a cyborg company with only 6 flavors of ice cream, but they have only superstar ninja developers. Only the senoritas and the senores of the mall are getting to work in this company. And in this company, there is a super enthusiastic developer. Let's call him Alco. And he always on top of everything that's going on in the industry. He reads all the recent blog posts and he always knows what's going on. And one day he comes to the office after he read a blog post about a new technology. And this blog post had a large, explanation about the technology. And at the end, there was a short snippet about how to get started, about getting started. And he was like, yeah, I can totally do it. So he decided to do it. And after getting started, he noticed that he doesn't have all the permissions that he needs to have in order to make it work. So he goes to his DevOps engineer, to Alex, and he asks her for more permissions. But then she asks him, why? Why do you want to introduce this new technology to production? We have something that does exactly the same thing that is already used across the entire company, across the entire R&D, and that is being managed by the DevOps team. So why do you want to introduce this new technology that does exactly the same thing? But Alco is not convinced, and he really wants to try it on because he really wants to do something further than just writing code. So they go to the VP R&D, and she says no. So then they go to the VP R&D and ask them for permissions to introduce this new technology to production. The VP R&D really wants to keep his superstar ninja developers highly motivated. So, of course, he agrees. So, Alco starts working on this new technology and he starts implementing it. And of course, he has his other task in the sprint, but he has to do both. And after a while, he gets really tired and really frustrated, and it's flaky. The service is in production, but it's flaky. Most of the time it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And Alco realized that all he has to do is to reboot it. And after a reboot, it's fine for about a week or so. So that's what he does. He's so frustrated that he has to take a couple of weeks of a vacation. And while he's on his vacation, things are starting to go wrong. And the dashboard is all completely red with many alerts, and no one knows what's up. And of course, he doesn't have a reception on his vacation. So everything is just going crazy. So what's my point with this story? That, yeah, simple architectures are less prone to downtime. But in real life, it's not that easy to just keep your infrastructure simple because you have people involved and technologies are changing and people want to try new things out and they want to work with different technologies on production. So in real life, just knowing that simple infrastructure is less prone to downtime doesn't cut it. So why does it happen? Why do developers suddenly want to introduce new technology to production, although they already have a technology that does exactly the same thing? Well, one reason can be a silo between the web development and operation. When DevOps was first introduced to the world, this was the main goal of DevOps, to close the silo between development and operation. But it doesn't really happen. And sometimes there's still a silo. And the transparency on how hard do the DevOps team work in order to maintain and introduce new technologies to production is not clear to the entire R&D. And they might think it's easy. They never heard about this ingress that we're talking about. They don't know that the VPC has to be private and the data has to stay inside. So they might think that it's pretty simple to introduce a new technology, but it's not always easy. Another reason can be the developer experience. No matter how good the service or the tool or the platform that the DevOps team provides, if the developers don't want to use it or don't know how to use it, it can be top notch, but it doesn't work squat. So it has to be documented and easy and good to use for the developers, for them to want to use it. Another reason can be no clear procedures. How do we introduce a new service to production? Do all the developers know how we do it? Does they have clear procedures? Do they know how hard it is or how simple it is? Or maybe the DevOps team is lacking the authority. Maybe it's not clear that the DevOps team or the SRE team has to do a production ready review in order for someone to be able to introduce a new service to production. Are there any authority to the DevOps team? Does their word count? So how do we prevent it? What steps can we take in order to not find ourselves in the situation that Alco's organization found himself in the story? First, in the DevOps side, we can do enablement, documentation of the current infrastructure that we support, onboarding for new developers to make the learning curve easier. We can establish guardrails. If the DevOps is a bottleneck, then probably most of the people will want to deal without it. But if you provide as much freedom as possible for the R&D team and just install guardrails for things that are not supposed to happen, then people will want to use your services. Another thing, and it's kind of related to everything, developer experience. The developer needs to feel that the tools provide enablement for him to use and to work fastly, quickly, and efficiently. From the SRE point of view, there needs to be clear guidelines and procedures on how to introduce a new service to production. Does it have to run a certain proof of concept, proof of value? Is the procedure accessible? And we need to do a production ready review. Does this service support all the environments, the dev environment, the alpha environment, whatever environments do you have? Does it have to be defined who's on call for the service? What is P0, P1, etc.? And ownership. I know that, I don't know, probably you're just like me, who likes to be jack of all trades. What do you do? I do everything. I'm kolboinik. But we need to remember that jack of all trades is also a master of none. So we need to have ownership and responsibilities inside the team. Everything has to be clear on who's the focal point and who are we going to approach when something is down. And outside the team, ownership again. Where are the boundaries? Who's in charge? Is this the R&D, the DevOps, the SRE? Who's on call for this service? Who's on call when the first on call doesn't know what to do, etc. Okay, so we have a big dilemma here. On the one hand, we started with establishing that simple architecture is less prone to downtime. But if it is so, when do we move forward? We don't want to be stuck with EC2 servers or, God forbid, on-prem servers, right? We want everything to be containerized or serverless or whatever the new trend is. So when is it time to move forward? How do we upgrade? Do we start from production, from development? How do we do it without harming our production? To what do we have upgrade? How do we choose the right technology? So let's try to answer those three pillars, those three questions. How do we choose the path? Business first. I know that DevOps, we're on the barzelim, on the bare metal. We don't like to deal with other things than pure technology. But if we want to introduce a new technology to production, then we have to take into account business KPIs. What is planned for the next roadmap? Do we have a big client that is planning to join us? Is it important that we won't have any unplanned things in the production? I know it is hard to imagine, but no harm for setting up a short talk with your PM and try to figure out what is planned for the next quarter or for the next sprint or whatever. Another thing that can help is looking at the new technology that we want to introduce. I know that sometimes technologies may sound super cool. Like who remembers Core OS? It was like, yeah, thank you. It was like, oh my God, it's so cool. It's an entire operating system that we can run containers on. And it was super hype for about 2 or 3 months. And now nobody's using it anymore. So how do we know if it's a trend, if it's not a trend? I would say that maybe if it's still not mature enough, maybe we can try it on our own homes, on our own accounts at home, and not try to introduce it to production until we can say for sure that it is mature enough for production. Another thing is planning. Before we start with the upgrade, we need to sit and plan step by step. How are we going to upgrade? What are we going to do if the upgrade fails, if it doesn't support all the versions that we need it to support? And do an internal production ready review like we do to other teams to make sure that their services are compliant with the production. We need to do it to ourselves as well. Does it support the development environment, etc.? On a more personal note, it may sound like I have everything figured out, but it's very far from the truth. There are so many things that happen in real life, and it's not just as easy as guidelines and procedures. There are also politics and internal prioritizations, and things are not as easy as just saying them. But I figured out that although it is really tiring, like handling the SRE, DevOps, and explaining the differences of the titles, and that the titles by themselves don't mean anything. But for me, learning about why do the different titles exist and why there is DevOps and there is platform engineering and there is SRE and what do these methodologies actually mean, it helped me a lot to build a clear procedures and clear guidelines for my team. And also, as a DevOps or SRE or whatever you are, don't be afraid to say SRE Not Sorry. Sometimes it's just a hype. Sometimes it's just a trend. It's not the time to introduce a new technology to production, and it's very much okay. Thank you.